see here. Taken together, we might synthesize the terms elicited by 701 and 556 to say, I mark the inferior ones with my commanding speech. The total value of the apotropaism has the most interesting correspondences. When we sum it entire, we find the value of 1408, and the plaintive sense of the Greek echo with this value suits the dismissal of the bad spirits or cacodemons and alludes to the repetitive nature of this part of the ceremony. Soter, or savior, was an epithet of Dionysus and other gods who presided over the antique mystery cults long before it was co-opted by Christianity as a title for Jesus. And Hermeneo suggests the translation from profane conditions to the sacred circumstance of the rite. In the cross-Kabbalistic, the individual words do have some interesting values. Certainly, isopsephic significance is to be expected of an important formula like Iao, where the anagram Io points to the action of the Ruach. The doves are suggestive of the central symbol of the Otio Laman, and the Mastos Asteris correspondences seem to invoke the milk of the stars. The idea of soy as relating to serpent venom is especially appealing in the light of the central theme of Liber 65, thus helping to confirm the Algoides, or personal genius, rather than a more general godhead, as the addressee of this invocation. Almost paradoxically, the secret sense of the vocative O Phale includes the sum of both the nominatives Kiteas and Phalos, indicating the organs of generation for both sexes. The total value of the cross-Kabbalistic at 5,923 is too high to permit easy correlations by means of the standard references. Now, in this case, however, since the individual terms of the formula are deployed separately across the body of the magician, there are some further composite values that may be of use, as in any case where there are clearly distinct or separated components in a larger formula. The ones I will use here are the arithmetic, geometric, and harmonic means. Here is a geometric representation of all three, to the values A and B. Capital A is the arithmetic mean of A and B, G is their geometric mean, and H their harmonic mean. And algebraic formulas for the three, when applied to the values x sub 1 through x sub n, are simple to express for the arithmetic, the geometric, and the harmonic means alike. The arithmetic mean is simply the value most average to the set. If all the excesses are canceled against the lacs, each would adjust to the arithmetic mean. It is thus the common orientation of all values and relates to basic scalar quantity. According to Pythagorean tradition, the geometric mean relates to direction in space, and thus its value suggests where the magician is placed by the formula. The harmonic mean, on the other hand, is associated with direction in time, so its value characterizes the change worked by the formula. So, applying these to the various terms of the cross-Kabbalistic, we find that their arithmetic mean, the fundamental common quantity, suggests that each of the terms serves to fortify and enliven a sephira within the magician's sphere of sensation. The geometric mean suggests placement, and in this case, the speaker claims descent from a mason, and thus the inherited power and authority to build fortifications. It characterizes the change worked by the formula. The correspondences here are quite lucid. By means of the cross-Kabbalistic, the magician asserts his free will and marks himself with a character, that is, the cross, by which that liberty is signified. Now we turn to the four principal god names of the ritual associated with the pentagrams projected to the four quarters. For literary context, these should, of course, be studied in the Vision and the Voice for Chaos and Babylon, and in the Golden Ass and Plato's Phaedrus for Eros and Psyche. Through some simple addition of letter values, we discover that our secret and ineffable lord, in his name Chaos, actually equates to skotaios, the Greek word for secret. The web or weave that is pharos might relate to the Latin equivalent textus in suggesting the distinctions and relationships inherent in the word. Pharos was also an island near Alexandria that gave its name to the lighthouse built upon it, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. The correspondences for Babylon speak strikingly for themselves. Eros, who conquers all, should be considered armed and unpredictable, according to gematria as well as by general consensus. The sole gematria equivalence for Psyche seems at first a little off-key, but if these names are identified through the formula of Tetragrammaton with the corresponding parts of the soul, then Psyche is the nephesh, and therefore the animal soul concerned with both appetites and fears. Now, if we take all four of these god names in combination according to the method already practiced, we find that the arithmetic mean yields some very intelligible correspondences. Any neighboring pair of the names can be taken as linked to the other in a simixis or marriage. Each of the names is placed on the circle that the magician paces in order to establish them. That circle is identified with the river Styx, the boundary between the exterior world of the living and the hidden world of the dead that is Hades. The interior of the circle is thus established as the world of the shades and spirits, an interworld of dream and vision. Valuable reading in this connection includes Spiritual Body and Celestial Earth by Henri Corbin, as well as The Dream and the Underworld by James Hillman. The geometric mean of the pentagram names characterizes the interworld in which the magician has placed himself. It is not a safe and drowsy retreat. Quite the contrary, it involves a surge of divine presence to form a precinct fit for operations of ritual slaughter. Universe where angels are at home and where living humans venture at peril. Is it hubris that brings the magician here? But the net effect of this change does not daunt the ritualist. The result of placing the pentagrams is that he experiences ecstasy. She is blessed. He receives the bliss from the great sea of Binah through his own neshama, or intuitive faculty. Restriction be unto Karanzon in the name of Babylon. The four names identified with the pentagrams and delivered with the sign of Horus are highly charged, and their interrelationships, or simixes, marriages, deserve further exploration. These are effectively latent figures and features of the star ruby, which could be activated through the star sapphire, understanding chaos to be pater, Babylon as mater, Eros as filius, and Psyche as philia in the latter ritual. Since these values are more potential than actual in the work of the star ruby, an exhaustive study of the correspondences would be out of place here. Still, there are a few that bear remark. The fact that the sum of chaos and Babylon equals a Greek phrase for the magician is evocative of the declaration in Liber B that the magus is love and bindeth together that and this in his conjuration. Moving on to the stooping syzygy of Babylon and Eros, we find that their sum, as Timoria, suggests the shedding of the blood of the saints into the cup of the vengeance of the mother. In both the higher and stooping syzygies, the harmonic means of the two terms create a correspondence with the Greek word for key, with and without an article.
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
on once more, we find that in the lower and rising syzygies, known correspondences are in much shorter supply, but values for the geometric means are still somewhat provocative. We see in this slide some identities for the arithmetic and geometric means of Eros and Psyche. And here are some values and correspondences for the fourth or rising syzygy between Psyche and Chaos. Now, the marriages just listed omit two further possible pairings. The masculine pentagram names are latitudinal, positioned toward the two horizons of the east and west. The longitudinal names are feminine, placed at the tropics where the circle turns from the south and north. As with the previous combinations, these are not emphasized by the course of the ritual, but the latitudinal names may be taken to inform the component triangles of the underfoot hexagram, which Crowley describes as an emergent property of the lesser pentagram ritual, while the longitudinal ones relate to the similar hexagram overhead. The sum of the masculine names is the value of Minotaur, the child of Pasiphae, traditionally appreciated by the vulgar as a monstrous calamity visited on the house of Minos because of his refusal to sacrifice to Poseidon a bull, which bull then sired the Minotaur with his queen. The story of Pasiphae is, in fact, one of the chief classical illustrations of the formula called the beast conjoined with the woman that pertains to the braid of Major Adept, and it is evoked in the prophet's vision of the 16th ether. In his Cefalu diaries, however, Crowley alluded to the Minotaur as a figure for the result of male homoerotic magic. He wrote, "This truth learn thou, against thy brother of mine. Learn this, thou bull, in my Pasiphae pasture. Learn thou that I, worn out with wallowing though I be, or seem to be to thee, can breed thee Minotaur, while these meek calves that tempt thee with soft comeliness will but give birth to their base kind, to kind potential of no more than milk, veal, beef, and leather." So wrote Crowley in 1920. Extolling perhaps the unnatural basis of the union he hoped for with Charles Frederick Russell. The word Cepheus that we see for the geometric mean of 981 could suggest the Kabbalistic Chokmah as a supernal masculine principle. On the other hand, if understood as of Sophia, the celestial mate of the adept according to the traditions of Sophianic mysticism, then it could indicate Babylon as the mother who alternately claims both the father and the son as her own. The word hypothesis that we see, identified with the harmonic mean of 974, originally meant foundation. It's literally set under, and might profitably be interpreted to reference the Sephra Yesod, and thus to have a phallic significance. The geometric mean of the feminine names has the value of the goddess Hestia, which is also the Greek word for hearth. Forlong Dukes observes that the Indo-European etymology of the word is a root meaning to shine or to burn, and that the cults of Hestia, Vesta, and cognate goddesses always involve the tending of internal flame. It is this sense of guarding the sacred energy that should govern the interpretation of this value, rather than a more pedestrian idea of domesticity. Likewise, Skene meant temple as well as house, and Hestia was, in fact, typically represented as wearing a veil. Having completed an analysis of the god names singly and in their various combinations, we now move to the central feature of the ritual, the paean. Now, this begins with the cry of rapture, Io, which has the same value as the war cry, Boi, and both are subsumed in the concept of halalia, meaning not necessarily linguistic speech, but any vocal utterance. By means of the value of the letter pi, the number 80 corresponds to the various possible meanings of the 27th path of the tree of life. That is, the letter pe, which includes a large set of martial correspondences harmonizing with Bowie. The value 131 for Pan suggests the birth of a master of the temple and giving the resulting child to suck in the sign Mater Triumphans. This initiatory transformation is the ultimate change toward which the AA offers to guide aspirants. The Kabbalistic path of the priestess is the 13th, joining Keter to Tiferet, the direct descent along which, cast down through the abyss is the light, the rosy cross, the rapture of union that destroys, that is the way. The rosy cross is the ambassador of Pan, as we learn from the Book of Lies. This descending rosy cross might also be compared to the cruciform dove that descends in the center of the Laman of OTO. The total value of the phrase Iopan identifies it as the point of equilibrium, inserted by Frater Perdurabo to serve as the fulcrum of the pentagram ritual. Equilibrium is marked as an essential condition of attainment throughout the literature of Thelema. Direct instruction of a general sort on this topic is given in Liber 30, Liber 41, Liber 90, and in Magic, Part 3, Chapter 8, among many others. Indeed, the initials OTO and AA alike are equilibrated combinations of letters, with each letter equilibrated on its own axis. In Liber 400, the fifth column from the right gives the methods of equilibrium suited to the different stages of attainment. The neophyte setting out in the bottom row seeks balance among the shells with the letter Kuf. As we read in Magic, any idea not equilibrated is below the abyss, contains in itself unmitigated duality or falsehood, and is, to that extent, cliphotic and dangerous. The graphic emblem of this falsehood and this discipline among the Qliphote is the moon trump of the tarot, with a running stream, a cursus, course, or curse, flanked by the hounds Love and Death, which are the letters P and N of Pan, where the aspirant's own microcosm figures as the A. Adepts of the magic of light must exercise equilibrium on the path, as represented in the adjustment trump. In contrast to the open area filled with drops of blood in the moon trump, the middle field of adjustment shows a woman or goddess with a sword along her central axis. The design is structured around that of the Masonic jewel of a Prince of Jerusalem, a diamond enclosing a sword and balances, another modification of which appears as a Laman in Magic. In the Masonic jewel, the letters D and Z for Darius and Zerubbabel appear over the cups of the balances. In both Crowley's redesigns, the Laman and the trump, the letters are Alpha and Omega, as the first and the last. Adding the letters of the Thelemic design to those in the Masonic jewel yields the two-lettered Hebrew words Od and Oz, signifying insubstantiality and solidity. The cups of the balances can be read as the testes and the sword as the phallus. Thus, the testes contain the extremes of human experience in potentia, from Aleph beginning to Omega end. They hold the vital principle of the dyad, the chromosomal division into two types, to be realized through their subsequent union. The context of that union is represented by the enclosing diamond or vesica. Being on the path, the adepts have grasped ideas that are both positive and negative, active and passive, male and female, and thus, as Crowley writes in Magic, fit to exist above the abyss in the Night of Pan. Ultimately, the adjustment trump, with its phallus-bearing goddess, can be seen as yet another form of the Baphometic Gynander. The corresponding values to equilibrium for healing and of the earth are together suggestive of Liber Legis, chapter 1, verse 53. This shall regenerate the world, the little world, my sister, my heart and my tongue, unto whom I send this kiss. Equilibrated initiation not only serves to redeem the individual, but to regenerate the world. It is the kiss toward Hadith from Numit, passing through and reconstituting the universe, or Pan, which lies between the asymptotes of all-encompassing continuity and atonic individuality. Now, I will digress here to a set of 3 god names that I take to be implicit in the Paean and the name Pan. Although these names were not part of the Star Ruby, as written by Crowley, I am going to explore their correspondences because of their importance in my personal practice. These words are an acrostic, make Pan into an acrostic, of the 3 gods, Priapus, Hades, and Nike. The words corresponding to the value for Priapus include terms fitting for the god of gardens, such as bud, which should be read with reference to Liber Aleph, chapter 86, as well as the beautiful, and the work of the gardener, which is the task of a master of the temple. A second set of terms brings to mind an armed knight and his relations with a maiden. The god Hades is characterized by his invisibility, his unbroken grasp on his treasures, which include human souls, and the barrenness of the winter earth after his rape of Kore. His realm is the fatal interiority of persons and events, the timeless world of the ancestors proper to this ceremony, where his initial Aleph is, or Alpha rather, is the heart of Pan, who is at the center of this rite. The sole correspondence listed for Nike is admittedly not very illuminating. Now, taking these 3 terms and synthesizing them according to our now accustomed method, we find the total of the values, an expanded form of Pan, corresponding to panic or fear that the god instills in mortals. Note also the translation of Phobos as Pachad, a title of Gebera with the value of 93. The value of Cosma suggests that abyss which is known as consciousness and the universe, and which is a wound in the unity of the real. The arithmetic mean indicates that each of the component gods is whole and an integral expression of divine law. Although it appears by position that Hades is the heart of the formula, each of them are entitled to the center in a sort of holographic arrangement. Each of these constituents of the demonized shepherd god Pan is equally a sort of forbidden wizardry. Gois is the root of Goetia, or filth that has been abominated by the worshippers of the slave gods. These 3 are the idol, the devil, and the goddess, a most sacred trinity, the principal theological operators of the unconscious. In this aspect, they even correspond to the great ones of Liber Legis, the visible object of worship, Ra Hor Kuit, the secret serpent, Hadit, and the queen of space, Nuit. The geometric mean suggests the intercourse between the magician and his genius, which empowers this ritual, and to which the practitioner aspires in the Paean. The breath is spirit, pneuma, ruach, ruh, nefesh, nafs, and so forth. Just as Tetragrammaton Elohim first breathed into his nostrils the breath of life and limitation in Genesis chapter 2, so the holy guardian angel breathes the dissolving breath of the infinite into the spirit of the magician. As Adonai speaks in Liber 65, chapter 1, verse 15, I breathe, and there is infinite disease in the spirit. This verse is glossed by Crowley as life disturbs the placidity of the mind's acceptance of dead symbols as reality. The correspondences for the harmonic mean suggest that the result is a paradox. The force capable of devastation creates a pasture suited to pastoral Pan for the abode of the magician. Now we turn to the classes of guardian spirits, originally from the Chaldean oracles of Pseudo-Zoroaster. The individual values of these names, Yungis, Stelatarchai, Sinokis, and Dionis, they yield correspondences that are difficult to interpret. Now, the mean values are another story. The corresponding terms eidolon and plerophoria for the arithmetic mean indicate that each quarter's guardians should indeed appear visually as an image to give the magician full assurance of the efficacy of the ceremony. As Crowley remarked to his Agape Lodge pupils regarding the archangels in the Lesser Pentagram ritual, note well that they should appear, and if the ritual is properly performed, to appear. Nor does this remark prohibit the active application of the imaginative faculty. In the same memo he wrote, you can figure out yourself the forms of the angels, or rather the archangels, proceeding to outline the customary Golden Dawn procedure for building up the image of an angel from the correspondences of the letters of its name in Hebrew. The further correspondence of the Megas Hiereus indicates that the guardians are all invested with the eonic power of the priest of the princes, whose initiative made them a part of this ritual. And while archipoemen could metaphorically refer to the same hierophantic office, it also has a biblical provenance in reference to Jesus, but perhaps most importantly serves to denote the power and position of the chief shepherd, Pan. The correspondences for the geometric mean indicate that when the magician has been enclosed in his consecrated box, as Crowley called the outcome of the pentagram ritual in a 1914 letter to the Occult Review, the lineal figures should be gloriously shining. He is then in a position to be fully at home in his astral circumstances. The letter psi, indicated by the value of the harmonic mean, was traditionally used as an abbreviation for psyche or soul. This phase of the ceremony has confirmed and consummated the soul's willingness to be true to its genius, integrating its powers through the formulating of the new law. If the cloven tongues, like as of fire, Kabbalistically shin, on each of the faithful in the Pentecost legend were a sign of the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, how much more so are the complete array of 6 stars, 4 pentagrams, and 2 hexagrams formulated by this ceremony, with their total of 32 points, corresponding to the complete 32 paths of wisdom. In the Sefer Yetzirah, these 32 paths are correlated to the 32 teeth of a human mouth, and Shin is verily a tooth. The benediction of the All-Begetter, All-Devourer be upon thee. Apopantos kakodaimonos! Love is the law. Love under will.
layers upon layers baked to perfection. Pair that with our never-ending first course. The Garfield movie exclusively in theaters.
The scramble for Africa is, I believe, one of the most poorly understood periods in history. From what I gather, most people seem to believe that the colonial powers one day sat around a map at the Berlin Conference, drawing borders around bits they wanted, and that was it. But the scramble had already begun by the time of the conference of 1884. Plus, the conference stated that any claimant must show effective occupation of a region before it was granted to them. This meant, in some instances, there were literal races between explorers, far more intense than just drawing lines on a map. During the scramble, great powers like Britain and France nearly went to war. It brought about a revolution in Portugal, and, I'd argue, with the exception of maybe the Zulus and Ethiopians, the Africans and their battles against colonialism are often just completely ignored. Plus, the fact that some African countries like Egypt and Ethiopia actually expanded is also often glossed over. But to understand the scramble, you really need to go back in time. Well, maybe you don't, but there's some fascinating empires, wars, and cultural exchanges beforehand. The first European colonies in Africa were set up by the Portuguese as bases along their route to India. These included Madeira in the Atlantic, Sofala in Mozambique, Luanda in Angola, and Mombasa and Zanzibar in East Africa. These all proved to be important stopover points for international trade, and this was pretty much the standard for colonialism at that time. It was far more profitable to set up factories for trade and control sea lanes, rather than taking over entire regions. As such, the Portuguese would also set up colonies in the Spice Islands, Hormuz in Persia, and, important to this story, in Oman. The Spanish and Portuguese had agreed to define.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I am Paradoxus Alpha. The word of the law is thelema. Who calls us Thelemites will do no wrong if he look but close into the word. For there are therein 3 grades, the hermit, and the lover, and the man of earth. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. OTO was the first organization to adopt the law of thelema as the basis for its moral and social teachings. Although the organization had existed in its earliest forms previous to the Cairo Revelation and to Aleister Crowley's involvement, it was originally developed by the German singer and intelligence agent Albert Karl Theodor Reuss as a vehicle for teachings that he credited to the chemist and occultist Karl Kellner. Kellner himself had great wealth from the invention of the industrial process for making pulp paper. He had a passionate interest in yoga and other forms of esoteric study. He had received instruction from 2 Asian adepts and an Algerian Sufi. Kellner was an initiate of the mysterious Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, and also a close associate of the prominent theosophist Franz Hartmann, whose occultist ideas were important within the small circle that became OTO. The Freemason and music composer Henry Klein was also among these few founders. Theodor Reuss had previously been one of the principal organizers of a revival of the Bavarian Illuminati. Kellner is supposed to have disapproved of this project, and it was only in 1902, when Reuss split with his Illuminati collaborator Leopold Engel, that Kellner agreed to authorize Reuss to organize students of his teachings. These students were later called by Reuss Perfect Illuminati, and we now know them as initiates of the sanctuary of the Gnosis, or members of the 9th degree of OTO. These first brethren, admitted to the order's central secret, formed what they called an Academia Masonica. The idea was that this group would instruct Freemasons in esoteric doctrines, and impart to some of them a supreme secret, later generally supposed to involve a technique of sexual magic. If they called this group OTO, it seems that they did so only privately until long after Kellner's death in 1905.
Royce had started publishing a journal called the Oriflamme in 1902. The title itself is the name of the Templar banner. As an organ of the Grand Lodge of Freemasonry for Germany, created in Paris with Royce at its head, and claiming recognition and authorization from the sovereign sanctuary of the Rite of Memphis in the USA and the Grand Lodge of the Swedenborgian Rite for Great Britain and Ireland. The first subordinate body of Royce's Masonic jurisdiction was Holy Grail Lodge and Temple Number 15, established in Berlin. In addition to the German Grand Lodge of Freemasonry, the early Oriflamme promoted a form of esoteric Rosicrucianism with organizational connections to the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. With the Swedenborgian Rite, which operated a version of the first 3 Masonic degrees, the Memphis Rite with its higher degrees, Royce was in a position not only to teach Masons, but to initiate aspirants into Masonry, particularly various high degrees not otherwise available in Germany. In addition, starting in 1902, he invited both already initiated individuals and already formed lodges to submit their affiliation and obedience to his Grand Lodge. By 1904, Royce had secured further patents, including one for the Cerno-Scottish Rite. Authority for the Oriflamme was located in Berlin for Germany in the person of Royce, and in Manchester for Great Britain and England in the person of John Yarker. Yarker was a Masonic historian with a fascination for obscure and marginal rites, and he had supplied Royce with some of the latter's earliest Masonic patents. With the cooperation of Academia Massonica fellows Franz Hartmann and Heinrich Klein, Royce established a constitution for this consolidated Masonic front in 1906. In 1908, Royce attended an international conference of esoteric bodies in Paris, organized by Gerard Uncos, also known as Papou. This conference was the site for mutual recognition and patent swapping by organizers of a wide variety of rites and systems. As early as 1906, Royce had demonstrated an interest in internationally expanding his authority by chartering a subordinate Grand Lodge in Berlin to Rudolf Steiner, who was at that time the General Secretary of the Theosophical Society in Germany. At the Masonic and Spiritualist Conference in Paris, Royce entered into several agreements. To Uncos, he dispensed national authority for France in the Oriflamme system of Masonry, and he also received from Uncos national authority for Germany in the Église catholique gnostique, which would later become the Gnostic Catholic Church in OTO. This may have been the point at which Royce received access to whatever Martinist credentials he later claimed for OTO, since Uncos was first and foremost the organizer of the lodge-based Martinist order. Royce also chartered Arnold Krum Heller as a personal representative to Latin America and exchanged friendly recognition with Matthew McBlain Thompson. Thompson was the head of the American Masonic Federation, which appears in later issues of the Oriflamme as a national body connected to Royce's orders. Thompson had emigrated from Scotland to the U.S. as a convert to Mormonism. He had been a Mason in Scotland, but arrived in Idaho to find that Mormons were excluded from Masonic bodies there. In his long quest for legitimacy, or at least a credible facade of legitimacy, for his Masonic efforts, Thompson took part in various interstate and international transactions involving other Masonic jurisdictions looking for ways to transcend provincial institutions according to the ideals of universal brotherhood. The later upshot of the story, however, is that Thompson and his American colleagues were convicted in federal court of mail fraud for operating a system of irregular Freemasonry. But they were really using the Music Man system of Masonic organizing. They sold charters, diplomas, rituals, and regalia with only the most nominal gestures at actual initiation, got out of town and left the locals to figure it out for themselves if they could. But it was during this earlier period when OTO was genuinely kept secret behind Royce's growing synthesis of Masonic, Rosicrucian, and Gnostic initiations that Aleister Crowley joined the order. He did so in the then usual way, by affiliating at his existing Masonic rank, which was the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, equivalent to what became the 7th degree of the OTO system. In 1912, Royce initiated Crowley into 3 further degrees of OTO proper, that is, the 8th, 9th, and 10th degrees, making him Grand Master of a new English section. At about this time, the Oriflama began to announce the ancient Order of Oriental Templars, Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, as the summit of its initiatory system. Crowley promoted his Grand Lodge as a section of the International OTO, not a Masonic obedience as such, and in 1913 he wrote the Gnostic Mass to serve as the central public and private celebration of OTO. In the years leading into World War I, Crowley revised the English OTO degree rituals, or Mysteria Mystica Maxima, to put distance between them and regular Masonry, to calibrate their orientation to the supreme secret, and to incorporate the law of Thelema as a central feature of OTO initiation. Since the theosophical boom of the late 19th century, women were working increasingly with men on equal footing in various esoteric groups, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The early 20th century had seen co-masonry developed both in connection with the Theosophical Society and otherwise to initiate women into Masonic degrees. And OTO also accepted women as members, beginning with the section chartered to Rudolf Steiner in 1906. Although Royce had not himself appointed women to any conspicuous leadership roles in the order, Crowley was quick to do so. Italian-born Vittoria Kramers was the first Grand Treasurer General of the British section, and Australian Layla Waddell was its second Grand Secretary General. Royce spent World War I in Switzerland, operating an a-national Grand Lodge in the bohemian and idealistic artists' community of Monteverito. The war was very bad for OTO, which had been formed as an expression of idealistic internationalism in the vein of the Theosophical Society, the International Olympic Committee, and the World's Columbian Exposition. All of these date from the same pre-war period and all suffered from the war. In 1917, with Crowley in the United States, the London authorities arrested OTO Lodgemaster Mary Davies on a fortune-telling charge and confiscated the furniture, library, and records of the lodge. The real reason for these actions was understood by the members to be English fear of German subversive influence. In 1918, the Gnostic Mass was adopted by Royce as the official ceremony of the Gnostic Catholic Church within OTO, and published in German, just a year after its original publication in English in the United States. After the war, Crowley established a profess house of the order at Cefalù in Sicily, styling it as the Abbey of Thelema. In 1921, Crowley proclaimed himself Royce's successor and demanded Royce's abdication. Royce died in 1923, leaving no will or other written instrument regarding OTO succession. Crowley claimed to have received correspondence in which Royce appointed him his successor. In any case, the remaining active national heads recognized Crowley's succession to the headship of the order. Crowley was kicked out of Italy by Mussolini's government without explanation at the time, but evidently on charges of sexual perversion. The so-called Vita Conference in 1925 actually had OTO leaders meeting in Hohenloben. It revealed tensions over Crowley's status as the prophet of Thelema and the contents of Thelemic teachings. Some of the senior German OTO initiates joined with Crowley's Anglophone supporters in OTO, while others split to form a separate body under Heinrich Trenker's Pansophical banner. Development of OTO in North America had started during World War I with Crowley's students, Charles Stansfeld Jones and Wilfred T. Smith, organizing a lodge at a Rose Croix chapter in British Columbia. In the 1930s, Smith collaborated with Jane Wolfe, who had been at the Abbey in Cefalù, to organize the OTO in the Los Angeles area. This group, Agape Lodge No. 2, later moved to Pasadena under the mastership of rocket scientist Jack Parsons. If World War I had been bad for OTO, World War II was even worse. Many countries banned Masonic-style organizations. Crowley's chief representative in Germany, Karl Germer, was imprisoned in a concentration camp because of his association with the order and its head. During the war, Crowley was visited by 2 members of the American military stationed in England, who had been initiated through Agape Lodge No. 2, Grady McMurtry and Frederick Mellinger. McMurtry had a good rapport with Crowley, who initiated him to the 9th degree, and they subsequently corresponded regarding the development of OTO. By the war's end, the Pasadena Lodge was the sole remaining OTO group in operation. Although Crowley continued other efforts, including, for example, issuing a charter to Gerald Gardner to organize a camp of Minervals. Crowley retired to Netherwood House in Hastings in 1945. Here, his visitors included the young Kenneth Grant, who joined OTO and served as Crowley's secretary. Crowley corresponded with Karl Germer in New York to prepare further writings for publication, and his will vested all of his material and intellectual property in OTO. So OTO is, among other things, the Crowley estate. Crowley died in 1947, succeeded by Germer as OHO, or outer head of the order. Germer's headship of the order was recognized by all surviving initiates, but he did not assert it strongly, preferring to style himself as Grand Treasurer General. Germer chartered Grant to run an OTO camp in England, but Grant exceeded the authority assigned to him and was expelled by Germer in 1955. Germer, assisted by Mellinger, also attempted to cultivate a new Swiss OTO under the headship of a surviving Swiss member, Hermann Metzger. But Germer and Metzger were not able to maintain a working relationship. Advancement of existing members through the degrees continued under Germer. There was, however, a moratorium on new members. In 1959, McMurtry called a meeting of American initiates with the aim of pressuring Germer to permit new admissions, but the meeting did not produce any real result. McMurtry moved thereafter to Washington, D.C. for professional reasons. He worked there as a political science professor and as a management consultant, and he lost touch with OTO in California. Germer died in 1962 without naming a successor. His will made his wife and Mellinger his executors. Later, in the 1960s, Metzger claimed to be OHO on the basis of an election conducted among Swiss members. He was denounced by Mellinger as a fraud. Later, he dropped identification of his group with OTO, and it persisted into the late 20th century as the Illuminati Order. In 1969, having been informed of Germer's death, McMurtry had enlisted and received the support of surviving U.S. initiates, including the ex-member and important Crowley disciple Israel Regardie and the Crowley disciple and archivist Gerald York. Initiations of new members then proceeded under McMurtry. The OTO Association was registered with the state of California by McMurtry in 1971, beginning the second and now enduring attempt to put OTO on a legal footing in the U.S., after Smith's botched incorporation as the Church of Thelema in 1934. Germer's widow, Sasha, died in 1975. The next year, OTO was legally recognized as heir to the materials Sasha had in custody from Germer's estate. McMurtry declared the OTO Thelema Lodge of Berkeley to be the superordinate Grand Lodge in 1977. In 1978, OTO was made a non-profit California corporation with McMurtry, Bill Heydrich, and Jim Grabe as officers. A grandfathering procedure for prior memberships was undertaken. Eventually, a second corporation with McMurtry as its executive was also created as Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica. Meanwhile, Marcello Ramos Mota, a former Germer AA pupil, sued publisher Samuel Weiser, asserting his status as OHO. His suit failed. During the court proceedings, though, OTO, originally called as witnesses by Weiser, served Mota with another suit. The verdict of this second suit arrived in 1985 with McMurtry on his deathbed. Mota lost again, and the federal court affirmed OTO as a continuing entity with McMurtry as its head. Per McMurtry's instructions, his successor was chosen by a vote of the ninth degree members. The successor was, and is, editor and musician Hymenaeus Beta, an OTO member who had earlier been involved with Canadian Crowley Publications, coordinated with Kenneth Grant. Hymenaeus Beta dissolved the separate EGC corporation and reintegrated the church into OTO through the bylaws of the latter. He also distributed the administration of Grand Lodge across the U.S., rather than having it centered in the Berkeley Thelema Lodge. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Hymenaeus Beta developed OTO in the U.S. on the Blue Equinox model, which is to say, in keeping with Crowley's published organizational plans for OTO government, most of which had never been implemented. In 1996, the existing OTO Corporation was designated as OTO International Headquarters, and our current United States Grand Lodge was constituted and incorporated to govern the order as a national section in the U.S., with Grand Master Sabazius as its Supreme and Holy King. In 2005, United Kingdom Grand Lodge was constituted, incorporated, and installed under the Grand Master Hyperion, just 93 years after Crowley's own appointment as the first British Grand Master. In 2006, OTO Australia was established under Grand Master Shiva, and in 2014, two more national Grand Lodges were created, finally outside of the Anglosphere: La Gran Loggia Italiana dell'Ordo Templi Orientis under Grand Master Fanes, and the Croatian Grand Lodge under Grand Master Abrasax. The five national sections and their supreme and holy kings represent a constitutional milestone. It was Hymenaeus Beta's mission to establish at least 5 working Grand Lodges. Until that was done, he had been subject to potential recall by the members of the Sanctuary of the Gnosis. Now, he can only be removed by a unanimous decision of the Grand Masters. The existence of multiple Grand Lodges in the 21st century has made OTO more organizationally diverse. OTO continues in dozens of countries worldwide to initiate men and women, to administer sacramental rites, to supply education in esoteric traditions, to authorize publications of the works of Aleister Crowley, and to pursue the establishment and extension of the law of Thelema. Love is the law, love under will.